And I'm going to kick off this webinar and say hello and welcome. This webinar is about the TPP Senior Route. TPS is presenting it today. That's because CIHT and us, as partners in operating the TPP, we tend to box and cox a bit and do webinars on different subjects, and CIHT has got some excellent videos on the standard route, which I strongly recommend to anybody thinking of that, who knows anybody that's going to try that particular route. So today's focus is in fact on the senior route, and I'm Keith Buck, and I'm the Skills Director of the Transport Planning Society. I am a Senior Route Reviewer, and I'm a member of the Professional Standards Committee that oversees the operations of the TPP. And today on the seminar I've got with me, and they'll introduce themselves later, Tom van Buren, who is a Senior Router as well, and also a Senior Route Reviewer, and Steve Hunter, who is, again, a member of PSC, a Senior Route TPP, and indeed a Standard Route Reviewer. We had another person who was going to be on the call today, Kate Morris, another Senior Router, a member of PSC, but she's left her slides on, and I'll say a few words about them, but she can't be with us today. So that's the kind of lineup. The main purpose of today is really to try and make sure that all senior route applicants understand the particularities of that route and the changes that have recently been made. And I'll be going on to all that in great further detail later on. And it is important that you understand these, because the old system is going to be replaced with a new system very soon, in fact in August, although there are exceptions to that if you're in the middle of a senior route application under the old system. But again, we'll come on to that later. I think it's important that everybody hears about those changes, and although we've been trying to publicize them since we made them last December, we're very keen that everybody is on the same page and knows exactly what's been happening. So we'll go into a lot more detail a bit later on, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions, and hopefully we'll be able to come up with some answers for you. First of all, I'm just going to do a little bit of context. Obviously, the TPP didn't come out of nowhere. In 2002, there was in fact a whole exercise called the TPS Skills Initiative, which created what's called a National Occupational Standard for Transport Planning. And that was finally agreed in 2007. So following on from that, we could create the qualification, the TPP. That was launched in 2008, concurrently with a professional development scheme which supported that qualification, which is the TPS PDS, which is still running today. Now, the TPP is awarded and managed jointly by TPS and CIHT, and it's administered by CIHT on behalf of the partnership. So if you have any applications or queries, you need to go through to via the CIHT admin. One thing that we have changed, I think, since about 2019, is to make TPP open to members of other professional bodies other than CIHT and TPS, who were the original partners. At the moment, we've only had some demand from CILT, but that is in fact active. So you can be a member of CILT instead of being a member of TPS or CIHT. That doesn't mean you avoid the TPP fees, but you pay them through your professional body. So it's now a much more open qualification in terms of professional bodies. The other thing that's happened since 2019, which is quite important, is that holders of the TPP qualification are now able to get a chartered title through CIHT as the chartered body. So with that
Keith,
add-on,
I'm not sure whether this is just me, but I can still only see the front slide. I don't know whether everyone else can see something that's moved on from that.
I can see them, Steve. I'm not sure what's happening there.
Okay.
Yeah, I can
Just
see
me
it as
then.
well.
Yep.
I'm moving to and fro. That's,
Yes, they're moving to and fro, Keith. They're fine.
yeah, I've got that on my check. I'm logged in as somebody else here, so okay. Steve, I'm not sure what that. I think you'll have to. You've got a set of the slides anyway, so maybe have a look at those and listen. And I'm going to run through. I'm nearly finished with this one now. Okay, so
what slide do you think you're showing now, Keith?
Transport Planning Professional, TPP launched in UK in 2008.
Okay, because then it flashed onto one with a flowchart, then it came back again.
No, I did that deliberately to make sure everything was for Steve, but I don't think he's able to see it. If anybody else, has anybody else got a problem with this, put it in the chat box. Okay. Right, I'm going to assume you're an outlier there, Steve, and see what goes on. Okay, to continue, as I was just saying, from 2019, getting the TPP means you're entitled to register as a chartered transport planning professional, CTPP. And finally, that we have, again, since 2021, opened up the TPP to international candidates, and that's quite important. Okay, so I'm now going to, again, a bit of context about this. There are, of course, different routes to TPP and CTPP, but the one obviously that we're going to focus on today is the senior route. In this, we are sometimes asked, well, why have you got a senior route? And I think the original purpose was basically to kind of recruit a tranche of people who could then go on to mentor and to kickstart the whole TPP process. And in Professional Standards Committee, we often discuss whether we should still have a senior route. But following that discussion, we have kind of reaffirmed its role alongside the standard route. So it is important to say that we have done that, and the senior route is still available. Some basics about it: it's still the requirement to demonstrate a higher level of competence than a standard route candidate. The broad knowledge and experience implies really that it's going to be at least 15 years of transport planning experience. The key factor that we'll come back to again during the course of this webinar is a significant contribution to the profession. That's a robust and a kind of tough call, but it is flexible in the way that people can do it. It's assessed through written submission, not interview, and it can be submitted at any time. A word about competence levels. We do operate as a standard across these four different levels, and awareness and experience and proficiency are explicitly required on both the standard and the senior route application form. And I think sometimes people get a bit confused with awareness versus knowledge. Awareness means that you don't have to know enough to do something, but you have to know about it, which is quite important. So you don't actually have to know how to apply for an operator's license, but you do have to know the existence of those licenses and their purpose in the world of transport planning. Experience and proficiency we'll come back to in a minute. Okay, This is the basic requirement table for both standard and senior route. And for the senior route, the important difference is that you have to choose 5, not 3 technical units from 1 to 10, in addition to data at proficiency level. And that does mean that you will also have to provide additional units with experience. But if you produce them from units T7 to T10, then that replaces the requirement for awareness. We assume that it's mocked up, in a sense, in your experience. Okay. The previous structure, and for many, for some of you that are in the middle of an application, the structure that you're still using was based on 2 key items: the detailed CV, covering all the units, numbered, and a pro forma, which had a reference back to that CV. So there had to be a precise reference and a reason to the CV item, and the reviewers had to see in that item in the CV the relevance to the particular unit. Now, there's always been a flexibility in which people could add in an introduction or a summary into the unit, a bit of narrative, but this was never clear that it was required, that it was advisable, or indeed any guidance on length. So that was a variable element in the existing structure. The nature of the CV, again, to emphasize this, it was very specific to the TPP application. The kind of standard general CV was not really suitable. So why do we want to go for a new structure? Obviously, preparing the CV in that form was very complex, and having to go back and retrieve details from projects early in a career could be quite time-consuming and difficult. We found there was some variation, really, and quite clearly some confusion as to the layout and how to tune the individual items to the units. So that, again, was an area that we had a lot of queries and a lot of questions about. And again, there was some misinterpretation of what senior meant. It's not just having a senior management position. It was important that there was a professional contribution as well. And again, we'll come on to that later. So moving on to what we've done and the changes that are in place. First of all, we've tried to have greater clarity in defining what senior really means. And again, it's a high level of responsibility, but we are open to different contexts. And again, this is a theme I think that we'll come back to during the course of this webinar. And on the slide I show here what we've actually said in terms of the senior route. This is open to people who've guided, sponsored projects, or indeed major research projects. So it is open to people with a high level of academic achievement as well as practical experience. But also, of course, being in a senior position within a project as well as a team, because we recognize that some people may have small teams and big projects, but it is important that that aspect of seniority is covered in the application. I think that the final one here is, again, this word substantial. We tried to define that in the guidance. It is a high bar to pass. It is not an easy option. And again, we ask everybody that passes to be not only have shown their contribution, but willing to be to contribute in future. And again, we give some examples here, but it's important that there's a range of possibilities open to you. So again, in the new structure, what we've got is something, I suppose, that's a little bit closer to what a standard route looks like. We're looking for a full written entry on the pro forma, and we're looking for somewhere between 500 and 1,000 words. And that's important. We don't mind if you want to do some cross-referencing, but it is absolutely crucial that you focus on the relevant part of the unit and the guidance that's given within the unit in Appendix 1 to the TPP documentation. So it must be relevant, but it's much more now in terms of a whole narrative for that unit. The other thing I've mentioned here is a greater emphasis on 2 sponsor statements. They must be experienced, but they must also be familiar with the competencies covered by the TPP system. And that's quite important. And that's something that we're, as I say, there's a greater emphasis on that now. It's not just a question of knowing someone and knowing they've been working in transport planning. We're asking the sponsors to take a moment and think about the specific requirements of the senior route before they write those sponsor statements. However, there's actually absolutely no change in terms of number of units, level of competence, or indeed the written review procedure. We still ask for a detailed CV, but it can be in a more normal format, although we do expect it to be comprehensive. So I think that, again, this expands slightly on what I've been saying. In terms of the cross-referencing here, if you are using the same project for more than one competency, and that's actually quite a likely occurrence, you'll only need to summarize it in later pro forma entries. Okay. I'm going to hand over to Tom Van Buren. I hope we'll.
Both visible and audible. Yes, no, yes, no.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. So, hi, everyone. I was asked to provide 3 slides for this. One about saying a little bit about myself, and I think particularly because I'm more of a technical guy, and my career route has been very technical rather than managerial. And then a little bit about my experience as having gone through the senior route, although that is quite a while ago. And then what I am looking for as a senior route reviewer, and a few tips and tricks there to sort of help you with providing people like me with information that enables us to assess. I think Keith, your slide has moved on to the wrong.
Sorry.
That's the one.
Okay.
Let's start with that one there first. So. I actually started my career in academia, so there is actually space for us that come from a university career originally in the transport planning society. As a transport planning professional, and I think that's quite important. It's not just about sort of we want senior managers. We want people, as Keith had already said, that have made a significant contribution to the profession and have played senior roles in projects and teams. The second point I want to make is we want to see, and I think that goes back to who I am. We definitely want to see your contributions to the profession. And in my case, I've spent a lot of time on knowledge transfer, both in the UK and in Got some feedback from somebody.
Where's Luna?
And
oh, Hoover. Bottom of the stairs, I think.
Okay, what's it about?
who is it, guys? Can somebody mute that person?
Apologies, it was me.
Okie dokie dokie. And yeah, and that's what we're looking for in others as well. Yeah, what have you done that shows you are somebody who takes your profession seriously, not just in your delivery to your employer, but to the profession more widely. A bit of review since 2012, the standard and the senior route, and the point about that is that in my experience, we are looking for something quite different in the senior route. And as senior route reviewers, we'll be looking for real evidence that you are somebody who has got that seniority and is standing in the field. I put that selfie up there because for reviewers, again, it's important that we see the real you. We generally don't know who you are. We get a submission, and that can be as dry as toast. And it's very difficult because we don't interview senior route candidates to really understand what, who this person is. And it's not a tick box exercise. It is very much about trying to understand the individual when we do these reviews. So make sure we see the real you and allow yourself to shine through that. Now you might say, finally, why do I bother with going for TPP, Senior Route TPP, and ultimately, hopefully, like me, you aspire to be a chartered transport planning professional. And unless you work for Transport Scotland, I think it won't win you more work, or it won't pay better either. But I think it's so important for us as transport planners that we stand up for the profession. I'm proud to be a transport planner. I always use CTPP in any of my affiliations, and I hope that's what you will aspire to as well. Next slide, please, Heath.
Yeah.
I don't see it next. There we go. There we go. So, what was my experience as a going through the senior route? The first thing is you forget the things that you've done, and even your CV that you use at work doesn't capture, I think, many of the things that you want to bring to the fore. Think of contributions that you've made to webinars or seminars or workshops. Think of people that you supervised or mentored in the various parts of your careers. Think of some of the contributions that you made to reports and policy development by the projects and the roles that you had. So maintain your CV, or sit back and make sure you update your CV with the things that matter for the senior route application, rather than for winning the next job. Speaking here as a consultant, of course. And the same is true for your CPD. Keep it up to date, and particularly focus on anything that you've done outside of work, such as our conferences that you've attended, workshops that you've spoken at. I expect senior route candidates not to just have attended, the necessary health and safety training that they had to do at work, and cyber security. I expect to see more than that. The next point to make, or maybe the next 2 points to make, is about the competencies, the required competencies. And I find, certainly as somebody who, as many of you will know, who enjoys modeling, that some of the competencies, such as, for example, stakeholder engagement, are a bit harder to sort of recognize and to provide evidence for. But you will have been involved with those kind of roles if you are somebody with 15 to 20 years experience, and if you've operated in a senior role. So it's particularly, I think, in project roles rather than in management roles where you will have picked up at least awareness and knowledge, but hopefully experience in many of the competencies that in the senior route we're looking for. So look at what is required, and think about the roles that you've played, the things that you've done, the projects that you've worked in, where you can provide evidence of really having actually worked with policy, stakeholder engagement, and so on and so forth. Or in other cases, modeling where you're not necessarily a modeler, but where you certainly have had to deal with modeling and modelers. It's not an easy job. I think in my case, it took probably 3 days to get my portfolio together, which is basically getting that very complex CV all organized. I would say it takes you 4 to 5 days to get your portfolio together. Don't expect to do it over a weekend without any preparation. I've already talked about that. I think it's easier to get the evidence out of projects and project roles, run out of management roles. So don't underestimate those as contributors to your evidence. And then finally, provide real evidence. I sometimes see submissions that are sort of very generic about, I have provided advice to or so, or I've managed teams of this size, or I am responsible for the profit and loss account for this particular part of our business. That doesn't really help me understand what you as an individual have learned and contributed. So we're looking for real evidence and much more than generic statements, which take me to my third slide, please, Keith, which sort of are the things that I would be looking for as a senior route reviewer. So first of all, we take our roles as reviewers very seriously. So it's not the easy way out. These portfolios are carefully scrutinized, and we're particularly sensitive as reviewers to that we want senior candidates to be further in their career and be able to show that than people that follow the standard routes. As also the case with standard routes, we're looking at you rather than the team that you represented. So use the word I and think about particularly the constructive and a critical challenge that you have carried through.
Sorry.
Don't know where I am. There I am. So we expect all TPPs to approach their work with a critical and constructive challenge, and particularly, obviously, we expect that of senior route candidates. Keith has already said that in the new format, the personal statement and the two sponsor statements are absolutely critical. They set the tone, the rest supplies the supporting information. So that is where you really need to put the effort. And that is a big change to what we required previously and what we were looking for previously, where we plowed through people's CVs and were looking for the evidence that was in that, rather than people actually providing in their personal statement the picture of the person that we were looking for. Final point then to make is think, and I've already said it before, think of what you've done outside. What's the contribution that you've made to the profession, and also as proof that we can expect you to continue to do that in the situation where you have become a transport planning professional, and I certainly hope a chartered transport planning professional after having gone through this process. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Tom. Excellent. If we could shift on to the next slide, Keith, that'd be just let me clear this thing. So Keith did part of this introduction. I've been working for Steer now for a quite long time, and putting this slide together in some ways was like thinking about that senior application. I don't normally look back 24 years, let alone to the point where a few years I worked for Pels before that, but those are all part of my journey. Those of you who are adept with your maths or working this out on a piece of paper in the background will see that actually I followed the senior route after something like 10 years experience, and that is pretty unusual. I suspect it's very unusual now. I was part of that first round of people when they were looking for volunteers to help do reviews and promote the process, and I think that I've kind of succeeded in doing that. I've been doing professional reviews on the standard routes for really quite a lot of years. I'm coming to the end of a 6-year term, as Keith said, on the Professional Standards Committee, which oversees the qualification, includes 2 years of being the chair of that committee, and now I've moved into auditing professional reviews. So that's looking at the reviewers and passing on feedback on how the reviews go from those sides. Now, just to kind of look at that senior route and how I would have met the requirement for that senior contribution at that stage, well, I would have done it by looking at the role I was playing on various projects. So we just stay on that first slide for a moment, Keith, if that's all right, just because if we just go back one.
Oh, right. Okay.
Sorry. So, there's a picture on there. I've not got the selfies of Tom, but that's a picture of one of the trams in Blackpool, and that's one of the examples I would have used, because for the original Blackpool tram upgrade, I was sitting in the meetings with the DfT for my client, arguing for why the DfT should give funding. And so, this wasn't just working in the background or client meetings, it was actually helping represent my client to the funding decision makers. Perhaps we move on now, please.
Yeah.
So what was unusual? Oh no, it was still on the one before that, I think. There we go, thank you. What was unusual about my background was that I did this time at Pell Frishman with lots of modelling and moving into a bit of development planning and design, and then went on to steer, or steered over sleeve as it was, and looked at a lot of business case. And business case is obviously a very wide set of skills, and also moved into things like giving expert witness or performing as an expert witness at public inquiry. And so all of those things show that actually across the TPP requirements, I think what you might say was a peculiar alignment across my career. So I had some of Tom's technical focus down the middle of sort of data and modeling, and particularly appraisal and evaluation, but also very wide in terms of design and evaluation. Let's move on now, Keith, please. So in terms of where my insights come from, well, as we've spoken out, I've done a lot of standard route reviews and know how they work differently. I was also, as part of my role on the Professional Standards Committee, part of the sort of the subset of that group who was involved in rewriting the requirements to try and make it more clear what we meant by senior. And this is important. Already and always, the senior route expects more than the standard route. I've told you that already. And really important here, and it's the sort of statement at the bottom of that slide, is this unequivocal, that actually the only chance you get to tell us, or tell people like Tom who are doing your senior route review, about your experience is through your written submission. In a standard route, if we're not sure, if we want to find out a bit more about exactly what your role was, or what you did, or what you learned from it, we can ask you. That makes a big difference. So actually, this isn't an easy route by any means, and you're trying to get a lot of information across in limited things. And for those of you with 15 to 20 years, some of the bits of evidence you'll get will be from nearly the start of your career, and that really is challenging how to balance it. This substantially recognised contributions to the transport planning profession is very interesting. I think we're in a different time now to where we were when we did it, but the types of things we would be looking for and are really useful of evidencing that, well, now it would be interesting think pieces and thoughts, and showing that you've been contributing sensible things, whether it's through LinkedIn or through your company websites. Of course, there's appearances of expert witness. They are different to pretty much anything else because it's a very personal role. Your name is on it. It's quite clear that you stand behind your statement and very little else. And then just as sort of another example of a role that I've got to play, which I think would help to evidence this now, is some work I did for the Homes England and MHCLG when I spoke to a huge selection of transport planners across the country about their housing infrastructure fund bids, and probably some of the people on this call. And so all those kind of things that allow you to show that you're external facing, not just internal facing, you know, all these things that you're doing things which are helping to progress transport planning. And, you know, the advice, whether it's standard or senior route from me, is that what we're looking for, and it's connected to Tom's constructive challenge point, is that it's not just, oh, I did this because the guidance told me I should. No, we want to know that you understand the guidance. We want to know that you actually thought about whether the guidance was the right thing to do. And we want to know whether you actually said, hang on, that's not sensible, this isn't working, this doesn't make sense for me to do this for my project, or really I ought to be doing things in a different way. Again, all of that is pretty difficult to get across in a written submission. Much easier, I would think, to get it across when you get to go and talk to some reviewers and do it via the standard route. Keith, I think I'll hand back to you there.
Thank you. I'm afraid that Kate Morris, who was intending to be with us today, couldn't. She sent us a few slides, which I'm going to run through very quickly. Incidentally, the two pictures here are not Kate when she started her TPP application and when she finished it. It didn't take her that long, but she was a senior route applicant like me in the kind of second tranche outside what Steve described as that first group that came forward to help us really implement the qualification. I think the reason that Kate was going to be here, and we're going to record something from her later, was to show that she had a slightly different route through to the senior TPP. And of course, she gives an example here of her involvement in the level 3 apprenticeship. She was sat through many trailblazer groups and committees to make sure that that got over the line. And that's an excellent example, I think, of what Tom and Steve have been talking about, having an external face as well as an internal one, which I think is quite important. And again, she really said here that there are different contexts in which you can show both your technical experience and your leadership roles. And it's not just in terms of managing a team, but it might be technical or academic. And it's important to refer to, in a sense, your role and responsibility in relation to the project, as well as to a specific management structure. And again, I think she echoes, and this was the consistency between us is entirely accidental, but we're glad to see it. Demonstrating, tell us about yourself, demonstrate your personal commitment. Okay, what I'm going to do now is wrap up this particular section and ask for some questions or maybe comments in the chat box, and we'll record those for future reference. We want to, our standard procedure is to actually try and put questions in the chat box, if you wouldn't mind doing that. But again, to come back to the three issues that we're interested in, the greater clarity, I think, is important. The question of senior versus standard route, the specific requirements, and the contribution to the profession. Before opening it up, I'm just going to say one final word. I mentioned it at the beginning. The new system is in place now. You can apply under the new guidance. That's fine. We prefer that. However, and we recognize these applications take a long time. If you're using the old system and you've done your CV, then we will accept those applications under the old guidance format. That's absolutely until the end of August is what PSC has decided. However, if that does give you problems in terms of completing the application, we are open to an extension. So you do need to contact one of us and say, hold on, I'm not going to make it by August. I need a bit longer. So you do need to tell us about that. But we are moving towards the new system, but there is a transition period, obviously, for people who have started and are quite far advanced under the old system. Okay, well, I'm going to, as I say, throw it open to questions. Right, the first question I've got here, and I'm assuming that Tom and Steve can see this
Yes.
as well, is about the standard route being less onerous.
Do you want me to start with that one, Keith? Or
Sure.
I mean, I think, Ian, that is right. If you've met the academic criteria, the sort of difference in putting together an application, a portfolio of evidence for the standard route and your senior route application is probably not hugely different. And I think that taking the advantage of doing the professional review, which shouldn't be a terrifying experience. No, actually the best professional reviews are enjoyable for everybody. And I think that you just get your chance to you get a wider chance to show your capability, that you meet the competencies.
Yeah, I'd echo that, Steve. So basically, if the evidence is sufficient for a senior route application, then the opportunity to actually support that in an interview would be a benefit. On the other hand, yes, there is an interview involved if you're confident and more comfortable with a written submission rather than the addition, which is an opportunity, but also obviously an activity of the interview. Then, yeah, go for the senior route. But the whole point about the standard route is, of course, that the competencies that we're looking for are slightly less than in the senior route. So if you got what it takes, then the standard route should be a relatively easy way to do it.
We've had another question in, which is kind of related to this, saying really, if the senior route isn't easy and it's not a substitute for the standard route, what circumstances do you advise people to undertake it? I don't know if you've got any comments. I'd like to kind of kick off by saying that in many ways it is a bit more flexible in the sense that you don't have to fix up the review process. And if you think you've got the breadth and the depth to take you to proficiency in more of the technical units, then it is now a reasonable thing for you to do, especially if you've been very active in professional development. So I think it becomes a preference for people who want to do it that route. And of course, you can apply it at any time. You're not constrained by a specific date on which you have to submit and appear. So I think there are some advantages. I don't know if Tom or Steve have got anything else.
Well, I have done both senior route and standard route reviews. And yes, there's a bit of a different dynamic here. I think it's never the right thing to put a number on sort of what amount of experience you need to sort of be successful in the senior route. And as Steve said, he applied successfully with around 10 years experience. Many people just don't gather enough evidence for the senior route with less than 20 years experience. 15 years in my experience is an outlier. So there is that period, that time in your career where the senior route just is going to be a real struggle. And that is sort of what I would say between 10 and 15, 18 years. And so that would be my advice. Why struggle through or scrape through a senior route application when that would be really hard work and a borderline success story if actually the standard route will be easy, because I, again, in my experience, people with having been really actively involved in the profession for more than 10 years can get the evidence together for their standard route portfolio and will be able to do the presentation of their expertise and their project in the standard route quite easily.
There is the question, isn't there, of the fact that to go for the standard route you need one of the MSc, the PDS, or the portfolio of technical knowledge. And I think there comes a point when you are in that sort of 20+ years where to go back to that stage, it should be obvious that you've got the knowledge, the basic stuff. And I think there comes a point where if you don't have one of those things recorded, I guess the MSc is the clearest one, then actually, if you can show that external facing thing and can evidence it, the senior route becomes a sensible thing to do. Yeah,
I think that's well put, Steve. There's some questions, a couple of questions here that are related. Is a senior managerial position essential? Is it more flexible now? And in relation to freelancers and them not managing big teams, I think we've tried to address this in the guidance, in the sense that the role, so you can make a senior route application as a freelancer or having had a substantial amount of your time as a freelancer. And certainly we've had some senior route applicants where they've had a career break for a variety of reasons, so maybe are not in a senior managerial position that other people are. But if they can show the importance and the crucial nature of the role that they were playing in a project or a research project or a practical project, then that will do. So I think in response to those two questions, I think we are open to it. So
I think some of the points on one of Kate's slides, Keith, about because you can provide technical leadership and all those kind of things. It's not, not sure that it ever should have been about the fact that you have a team of 30 people, because you could have a team of 30 people with no transport planning, not doing very much transport planning on a day-to-day basis. We're fundamentally looking for people, I think, who are transport planners and active in transport planning.
I think that was the case before, Steve, you're right. And I can think of examples from my senior route reviewing where that's arisen and people have got the senior route qualification, but I think it wasn't entirely clear. And hopefully that will be more clear both in the guidance and after this this webinar.
I just want to jump in and just on that question by Hugh. I think freelancers will, in my experience, rarely work alone. They work as part of a team, and they often work as a troubleshooter in a team, and will in that way take a number of people through improving their technical capabilities for the future. So I don't want to use the word creative thinking, but there is an amount of creativity involved in presenting to the reviewers why what you have done in those various roles is showing that leadership, and has been a real contribution to the profession. And I think that is definitely possible as a senior expert, as many freelancers are, by really looking at the evidence that we're looking for and the evidence that you can present in that respect.
Yeah. I've had a question on sponsors here as well. I think the need for 10 years experience, that is correct, that is required. But other needs, we will be expecting them to know a bit about TPP and the various technical units, so that they can effectively say that they confirm your competence in those areas. So it's not just that they've got 10 years, it's hopefully that they are knowledgeable about the TPP and the different units.
And I think one thing that's really important there, Keith, is that they know you really well. That because obviously, you're presenting yourself as a senior person. I don't think you would do that by getting two people from behind the scenes in the office with 10 years experience to say that. But equally, what you don't want to be doing is kind of phoning up Tom and saying, oh, I met you once at a conference, will you sponsor me? Because Tom will say no, obviously, because you really need to know somebody well and what they're doing in order to sponsor them.
Yeah, indeed. I think that there are some special arrangements for the international candidates in place, but apart from that, that's absolutely right, and that has risen in importance. I think we've all noted the need for the benefit of a face-to-face review being that you can have a drink afterwards. Sadly, we do quite a lot of it over the net, so that opportunity doesn't always.
Well, also it's worth explaining, isn't it, Keith, that actually the end of the review isn't absolutely the end of the process. So there's a sort of process after the review. The reviewers have to have their debrief, and kind of there's quite a lot of paperwork to get in order. And then actually this comes down to the role of the Professional Standards Committee, which is that the papers are then passed on for the decision and things to be reviewed. So unfortunately, we don't get to the end of the review and are able to say, you've done it, and crack open the champagne, which is probably a pity.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly for the reviewers. I wanted to pick up Graham James's point. I think that if you saw that, Keith, which is sort of now a little bit higher up.
Fine. Good.
And given that it was that Graham sort of pointed that particular question to me as a senior route reviewer as well. I think it's not difficult. I think it's not difficult in virtually any project that you've worked on or any team that you've worked on to pick out those personal experiences and personal contributions and personal learnings. There's nothing wrong with learnings as well. So well, as I said, we should just say I was responsible for X, Y, Z. What I, as a senior route reviewer, would be looking for would be saying I was responsible for X, Y, Z, and I take particular pride in having done, having, I don't know, recovered a transport model that was going nowhere to something that could be used for decision making, or where I used my my passion for sustainable transport to get together the key players in this particular project, in this particular intervention, and manage to get people around the table and to find a compromise that worked. So
well, how about I saved my client or my organization time and money, or both, by helping them get to a solution which could be implemented quicker and more efficiently, and those kind of sides of things.
So it's, I think in a company CV, you want to see, look, Tom was responsible for a team of 20 people that successfully delivered a transport model for the West Midlands. That's in your company CV. That's what somebody wants to buy. What we want to buy is, I don't know, Tom, by leading that team, he developed the skills of these people by applying the model, by developing and applying the model. He contributed to our knowledge of how modeling is done well, and also how it shouldn't be done, unfortunately. As Steve said, that how we worked together through a difficult process with the end users to end up with a tool that was actually useful and available within the time scale that it needed to be delivered. So I think I hope that sort of shows you. We're talking about you, not about sort of the more generic, grey individual that actually is just a member of staff of an organization.
Well, it's a classic example of the statement, isn't it, you gave, Tom, isn't it, that he's responsible for a team that did this. It doesn't actually say whether you had any involvement in the transport model for the West Midlands at all. Yeah.
And I think that's why I said earlier, I think it's easier to get these examples out of your projects than out of your managerial responsibilities. Now, you might have been responsible for a team of 200 people, but how much you actually got involved with these people in terms of their development and their well-being, and how they themselves developed and contributed to the success of the projects and the people that they worked for. That is invisible. Then we need more than that. And I think big numbers also don't really help. Whether you're responsible for 10 people or 1,000 people is not what makes a difference. It's who you are and what you have contributed to these people, and as a leader, and in terms of developing them into good transport planners is for me much more important.
Yeah. Look, we're coming to the end, but there's one quick reply I want to give about CILT membership. It is indeed open to CILT members to become TPPs and CTPPs. But the question was, would MCILT status allow someone to use the CTPP designation? The simple answer is no. The only route to CTPP is through the TPP. It is a title, not a qualification. You have to get the TPP first, and that's the only way to get it. But you can be a member of CILT and not CIHT or TPS. So that was
and I want to add to that, Keith, and I'm probably not the only one who knows this and who's experienced this. I met somebody who's both a chartered engineer and a chartered transport planning professional, and she said that to become a chartered transport planning professional is harder than to become a chartered engineer. And therefore, I think we as TPPs, or those working towards TPP, should take pride in that. It's actually pretty hard to achieve, and having achieved that, you take pride in having that. So I think it shouldn't be diluted. It is still an exclusive club, but I think on the call there's so many people around the call today that I would say, if you put the effort in, I can't see why you should not be able to achieve that TPP qualification via the senior route.
And as someone else, Tom, who's both CEng and CTPP, it's the breadth of the requirement to be a transport planner, and that's about what we do, isn't it? Transport planning isn't just a very narrow set of skills. It's you're affecting people. You're doing things that have really big impacts. The society would fall apart without us. Let's face it.
Of course.
okay. That seems a very good note on which to close the webinar, that society will fall apart without us. Look, people are dropping off the call now, and thanks to everybody that's attended. I really hope you found that useful, and don't hesitate to follow it up. I hope we've answered the questions. We've got a recording of the webinar and the questions that you've put, and we'll be reviewing those and producing a response to that, and hopefully publishing a recording for people who missed it today. But thanks to everybody for coming and participating and being on the call. We hope you found that useful, and I'm going to, if I can now, say goodbye and end the meeting.
Excellent. Good seeing you all.
Thank you very much. Bye.
And thanks, Keith,
Take
for
care.
organising.
Bye-bye.